Today, we're going to talk about greening the fort. By greening, we're talking about green building in this case. So I'm going to start with what the goal of the Fort Collins Green Building Program is. And it's really to put together a framework that over time increasingly aligns our built environment, our building projects, with the community goals of a vibrant economy, healthy community, and a sustainable environment. You'll hear, I expect you might hear from Josie, talking about not just the triple bottom line, but an integrated bottom line, how we can get all of these benefits simultaneously through improving our built environment. What are these community goals? Right now, as defined by the policies that are plans put in place by City Council, we have the Climate Action Plan that has very specific targets around our community greenhouse gas emissions, taking them downwards, by the way. The energy policy, which is a key component and linkage to that climate plan of improving the energy efficiency of our community energy use, and our water conservation plan that applies to the city. Again, directs us to continually keep reducing the amount of water we're using. Now today, you're going to get kind of a snapshot of a variety of things going on in Fort Collins, starting with what I'm calling the leading edge. Josie is going to be talking about what happens when you want to go beyond just a sustainable building or a green building. What would be next? How do we start to think about that? How do we go beyond something that is merely sustainable to, I'm sure she'll ask you, what's next? What goes beyond that? Next, we're going to hear some examples of projects here in town that are demonstrating green building right now. Green building or greening our built environment is not a hypothetical that's out in the future. It's what's happening in many areas in our community right now, and we have some tremendous examples of that. So we'll hear about a few specific examples of projects, either currently under construction or in design. We'll have a break, and I'm going to come back after the break and talk about the development of Fort Collins Green Building Program, specifically designed to start moving green building into the mainstream. How do we take the principles of green building and start to pull some of those elements and make them part of what's required, our minimum standards here in the community. So we'll be talking about code at that point, and I'll give you the context of the overall program as well as where that effort stands right now vis-a-vis our work in preparing to talk with our City Council. And I expect we'll have plenty of time for questions and discussion as well. I'm going to switch gears and introduce Josie Plout. Many of you may have seen Josie speak in the past. Josie is Director of Projects for the Institute for the Built Environment at Colorado State University. She has a degree in Business and Sustainability from Fort Lewis College and a Master's in Construction Management with an emphasis in sustainability from CSU. She's worked private, nonprofit, government sectors, and really is an expert at facilitating and coordinating green building projects. She's also a very experienced lecturer, instructor, and facilitator. She's certified by Leadership in Energy Environmental Design, or LEED, in various versions. I think whatever there is, she's certified in and an accredited professional. And we're very fortunate to have her locally to help us both on the academic side as well as on the practical side. And that's part of what I like. What Josie brings is experience in both of those arenas and the ability to bring them together and talk about them. So.
As John was saying, I work at the Institute for the Built Environment at CSU, and we're very proud to be part of this community. We do a lot of work here in the city of Fort Collins, primarily in northern Colorado is where most of our efforts are involved, so we really consider ourselves an integral part of the northern Colorado and particularly of the Fort Collins green building community. And I do have the great privilege of working both at the university, so having access to all of the intellectual capital and the cutting edge research ideas, and then also being able to apply those on real world projects here in town. And we bring students into those projects and get them the professional experience that they need to be able to go out and get jobs as green building professionals. So thanks for your lovely, gracious introduction, John. And I'm happy to be here today to talk to you. We're going to do a little bit of a whirlwind tour of green building. They asked me to kind of set the tone for the day a little bit So I'm going to talk a little bit about what IBE does in this community, and then I'm going to talk just very briefly about the LEED Green Building Rating System. Then I'm going to talk about the Living Building Challenge, which is a beyond LEED rating system. And then I'm going to talk about lenses, which is a project that we've been developing at CSU. So if you break up the time, there's just a few minutes for each topic. So sort of grab onto your seats. I hope you're all wide awake. And there will be some audience participation as well. So expect that you might have to speak up a little bit. At IBE, our mission is to foster sustainability of the built and natural environments through interdisciplinary research-based educational forums. I think our executive director, Brian Dunbar, is the only one who can say that without slipping up on it whatsoever. But if we break it down a little bit, fostering, so that's facilitating, building, encouraging, sustainability of the built and natural environments. So really looking at that intersection or that crossover between what we normally consider sort of human-formed built environments, buildings, roads, structures, infrastructure, utilities, and the natural environment, which is sort of everything else. And so looking at how we can maintain, sustain, revitalize these environments through interdisciplinary. This is a big piece of it. So we really work to bring in people from across various disciplines. That means within the building industry, we're bringing people together. So we're getting architects to actually talk to engineers and vice versa, contractors to inform the project team. And then beyond that, we're bringing in a larger cadre of scientists and children and doctors and spiritual leaders, and really looking at how those people can help to inform our built environments as well. So we really want to reach out sort of as far as we can to say that we're all affected by the places that we create in our society. So we need to be interdisciplinary and have a broad reach. Research-based. We don't want this to be sort of on false precedent. What we're doing has to be based in solid fact and understanding. So it's important that we're not being sort of lazy about making assumptions, but that we're actually conducting and reviewing key research in these topics. And then educational forums. So we want everyone to learn along the way. We want our students to learn, we want the professionals to learn, and of course it's a tremendous growing experience for ourselves as well. So very quickly, when we talk about the term sustainability, what is it that we're talking about? So the ability to maintain over time. Great. So holistic or a systems approach, looking at the whole system, not just at isolated parts, which may go back to the gentleman in the back statement. So maybe looking at it from a building perspective, looking at a building that is kind of independent. It provides its own power. It has more closed loop systems, that kind of thing. So those are all really lovely definitions. One of my favorite definitions that puts it very simply is humanity living equitably within the means of nature. So here we have sort of the triple bottom line, or as John was referring to earlier, the integrated bottom line. So we have humanity living. This really implies a sense of culture, a sense of vibrancy, and then equitably. So that means that all people have access to culture and a vibrant, healthy life. And then certainly within the natural systems. So the capacity really of the planet to maintain for a long period of time, like you were saying, the ability to sustain over time. So that is humanity living within the means of nature. And I can't take credit for that myself. Mathis Wackernagel and William Reith gave that definition in 1996. So IBE, I'm talking a little bit about our activities within the community. We have three main areas that we work in. We do outreach education. So we've been offering green building certificate programs in the Fort Collins community for the last 5 or 6 years. And those are geared towards working professionals, 1 night a week, 12 weeks long. And it's kind of a survey of green building. We have the opportunity to bring you really amazing industry professionals, really leaders in the nation and in some cases in the world are really close to us, and we're able to bring those to you and get you some FaceTime with the real professionals. So we do those. How many of you, I think there's a number of you who have participated in those. Got a nice about 6 folks who've participated in our green building certificate programs. So we offer one that has a commercial focus and one that has a residential focus, and those will be coming up again in the spring. And if you're interested in those, you can find them on our website, which I think will be at the end of my presentation. And then we do research. We do a lot of applied research, so we aren't a real, super pie in the sky, ivory tower kind of research organization. We really do research on applied projects. So recently we did a project that looked at the greening of the structural steel industry. So looking at how we green the design, fabrication, and erection of structural steel, and we did that focused on the NREL project down in Golden. Another recent project is we did some work with Rocky National Park, and we looked at greening their buildings within the historic context of the park, the historic and natural resource context of the park. So they have very sensitive environments in which they're working to green things. And so we were looking at how do you do that within the park setting where you have sensitive habitat areas, you may have endangered species, you may have historic landmarks. So how do you go ahead and green buildings within those sensitive environments? And then the bulk of the work that I focus on is our service learning project work, which I alluded to a little bit already, where we do a lot of green building and lead management. We've worked on approximately 30 or 35 projects here in northern Colorado, southern Wyoming, and we help to sort of steward the lead process. I'll talk a little bit more about what that is if you're not familiar with it. And then we've also done some work in the corporate sustainability realm. So a partial list of the projects that we've worked on. We do a lot of charrette facilitation, so that's where we get that big group of stakeholders together and we sort of get people focused in the same direction and then exploring ways that they can make their project more sustainable from a sort of a social, economic, and environmental perspective. And then we've done a number of green buildings. We've done a lot of work with Poudre School District and have been a big part of their award-winning green schools, which are some of the best performing schools in the nation. We've done a number of campus buildings, both here at CSU, and as I mentioned, we have crossed the border and worked with projects in Laramie as well. But they're very nice people up there, despite what you might think. And then we've done a number of private office buildings here in town, and then also worked with nonprofit organizations. So we helped with the United Way Housing Services building and also the Cheyenne Botanic Gardens in Cheyenne. We've also done sustainability management plans. We've worked with New Belgium Brewing, McWhinney, and we're currently working with RB+B Architects to look at how they can green their internal operations and processes and not just the buildings that they create. The outcome from getting these students involved in the green building projects is that they go out and they get fabulous jobs. Most of them start making more money than I do right off the bat, which I'm sort of proud of. But they, as you can see, they work for some pretty important folks. This is Grant French. He is the corporate sustainability manager for Swinnerton Construction, very large national construction firm. Down here we've got John Millade. He's working with Perkins & Will, which is, I think, the second largest architectural house in the country. Dana works at Architectural Energy Corporation. Ben at YRG Sustainability Consultants. Steph works at Rocky Mountain Institute in Boulder, and a few of them we keep around, like April Wackerman. She actually stayed on staff as our projects manager to help sort of with the work that we do at IBE. So what we see from this work is that people are able to get the experience that they need to go out and get the jobs that they want. It's probably worth mentioning too that all of the work that I mentioned above, it is service for fee. We're an enterprise within the university, so we do not receive any direct funding from the university, but we're entirely self-funded through the programs and offerings that we do. So why, another pop quiz, why are buildings so important to sustainability? Why do we care so much about the built environment? Major energy consumers. Yes, what else? A lot of materials. So we are extracting an incredible amount of raw resources, whether that's stone, wood, metals, and all of that is going into our buildings. What else? A lot of time indoors. People on average spend 80 to 90% of their time indoors. So we spend far more time inside than we do outside. And the materials that we use, the toxins that may be in those materials, or in the way that we clean our environments, can have a very significant impact on human health. All right, those are all excellent examples of why buildings are important. And to give you some stats on that, these are primarily from the U.S. Department of Energy. Buildings are responsible for about 12% of fresh water use, almost 40% of CO2 emissions, which is a surprise to most people. Most people think that cars are the primary source of CO2 emissions, and buildings far exceed cars. And when we say buildings here, we are talking about homes and commercial buildings. The primary reason here is because of the electricity consumption. As you mentioned, buildings are responsible for about 70% of our electricity, which is in most places, and certainly here, primarily fueled by coal. And so coal is a major emitter of CO2. And then also 65% of waste output. So when we look at the amount of garbage or the amount of waste that goes into the landfills, about 50% of that in Larimer County is related to construction waste. And it's an important issue for us as citizens of this place because it's difficult to find places that want to have landfills, right? It's not necessarily an easy thing to do, and it takes up valuable resources, and so they have a significant impact on the waste and basically our infrastructure. If you look at all of this, it has a lot to do with infrastructure as well. So benefits of green building are many. I've got pictures here of Fossil Ridge High School and Kennard Junior High. This picture up here, there's not a single light on in that space. That's 100% daylit. So good daylighting can reduce both your electric use and it can reduce your cooling loads in your in the warm seasons. So you're not putting all that excess heat into the building, which in turn doesn't have to be cooled. So energy efficiency and water savings are certainly two of the keynotes of green building. In addition, sort of the human aspect of this, high performance lighting, improved air quality, temperature control and comfort, those are all also hallmarks of green buildings. We're really looking to make buildings that support people. Since we do spend so much time inside, we're looking to find ways to make buildings that work better for us as human beings. And then finally, there are the broader, sort of more social benefits, which include emissions reductions and reduced waste, reduced demand on infrastructure. So metrics and accountability. The green symbol, which I think has become known as the leaf, is being used pervasively through advertising. And I think that many companies believe if they put a green leaf on their product, that we will believe that it is a green product. How many of you believe that every product with a green leaf on it is a green product? No one? Okay. So we need ways to determine what this is, because it can be a little bit vague, it can be a little bit greenwashed, if you will. So there are a number of metrics and accountability systems that are emerging. And so I'm going to talk to you about 3 such systems, and then there are many more. So there are some really great third-party systems that take the time to do the research that you wish you could do, but don't, right? Most of us don't do the research that we should. And so third-party verification systems are one way to validate whether or not something is green. In the building world, a lot of this is related to LEED, Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. LEED is the brainchild of the U.S. Green Building Council. The U.S. Green Building Council is now the largest nonprofit in the world, which is amazing. It's only about 15 years old, and it recently reached that status of the largest nonprofit in the world. So it's not a government organization. It's member supported, so organizations like CSU or architecture and engineering firms can become a member of USGBC, and then that membership goes to support all of the activities that USGBC does, which include education, their National Green Build Expo, and primarily the development and management of the LEED Green Building Rating System. They also do a certain amount of work in advocacy and public policy, and so they've been instrumental in helping to develop ideas around green codes, which you'll hear more about a little bit later today. But they have been helping to develop the standards for what those green codes might be. These are consensus-based standards, so it's important to understand that LEED came from industry. They're real working professionals, real architects, engineers, contractors, product manufacturers who all came together to create the LEED rating system, and they continue to create it. So it's on a continuous review cycle where it changes every 3 years. Now, for people like Corey, that's a little bit mind-boggling and it kind of drives him nuts. He's an engineer and it's kind of changing all the time, which is why they need to hire people like me who stay on top of it and can help guide the process. But really, all joking aside, it's a very good system that has hundreds of thousands of hours of professional time dedicated to identifying what are the best standards towards making a green building. And it's really set out to do something tremendous and has achieved it in many ways, or is achieving it, which is market transformation. LEED really set out to change the market and to shift the tides towards building greener buildings. And they've been tremendously successful in that regard. So it's not without its challenges, and you can certainly build green buildings that aren't using the LEED rating system, although they're few and far between. I hope everyone heard that really clearly. It's pretty rare that people can actually kind of get all the way through that process without using some sort of guidance tool or metric. You have to be a pretty deep green practitioner to be able to get there on your own. And certainly people can build LEED buildings that aren't terribly green either. It is possible to just sort of embark on a point chasing endeavor and not really be a good practitioner. And so there is sort of skill that's involved in doing green building, and it's an art and a science. And LEED is really meant to be a checklist, a way to go through and see what you've done and what you haven't done, and what you might be able to do. And there's 4 basic certification levels. The green one is certified, then we have silver, gold, and platinum. LEED is broken up into 5 main categories above this line, and then sort of two sort of catch-all categories, if you will. But it looks at sustainable sites, which deal with things like stormwater, transportation, site lighting, what kind of site you're building on, brownfield, greenfield, sensitive habitat, that sort of thing. Water efficiency, which deals with outdoor water efficiency in your landscaping and indoor water efficiency inside of your building. Energy and atmosphere is the largest category you can see here, with a total possible 35 points and 3 prerequisites, dealing with the energy efficiency of the building, the types of refrigerants that are used, if you use renewable energy, if you use green power, so if you purchase wind power, for example. All of those are addressed in energy and atmosphere. Materials and resources is where we get back at your comment from earlier about the energy involved in the materials. So we're looking at, is it recycled content? Is it from a renewable resource? Is it reused? Is it from a local resource? That sort of thing. Indoor environmental quality has to do with that human component that you guys were getting at earlier, which is there daylight in the building? Is there controllability of lighting systems? Are we using low toxicity products? And so there are points around each one of those. Innovation and design is a category for, hey, LEED doesn't cover everything, so if you did something that you think deserves merit, you can get credit for it by applying under innovation and design. And then finally, regional priority. So one of the criticisms of LEED is that it wasn't region specific. It was too generic of a system. And so basically, local councils around the country identified which points in here were most important. And so if you achieve those points up here, you sort of get a bonus point down in the regional priority credit. There are 8 total prerequisites. Those are 8 things you have to do to play the game. And then there are a possible of 110 points. So really you can see that there are just a few things that are highly prescriptive, and then most of it is up to the design team to determine what are the appropriate strategies. So it's not highly dogmatic, it isn't highly prescriptive, and it doesn't make you do a ton of things that don't make sense. It's really up to you as a team to decide if that's an appropriate strategy or not. So there's quite a bit of flexibility built in. And then you can see here what the general point breakdown is. So in order to get a certified project, you must meet all 8 prerequisites and have 40 points. Studies show that most projects have somewhere between 15 and 20 points already embedded in them. So you're really looking at, adding a handful of, well, maybe a little more than a handful, but maybe 15 or 20 additional points, and maybe a couple of the prerequisites that you wouldn't have done otherwise. So this is a pretty easy entry point. Out of all the projects that IBE has done, we've never done a certified project. Our lowest level has been silver, but most of our projects fall in the gold category, and we have had 2 platinum projects as well. So we're seeing that really a gold level certification is fairly achievable in most of the projects that we do. And these are typical projects with normal construction budgets. They are typically, schools or higher end office buildings, so we aren't talking about total bottom of the barrel construction. And that is one point to make. It's not, we're not saying these are code compliant buildings that don't take any effort. We're saying that we're already starting at a higher quality product. And when you're in that range, it's not terribly difficult to achieve LEED certification. And I like to say that LEED's sort of like a diploma. So some people will say, well, we're just going to build a green building, but we're not going to get it certified. And I say, well, that's sort of like saying, well, I swear I'm going to go to college and I'm going to go to class and I'm going to do all my homework, but I'm just not going to get the degree. I'm just not going to do that senior capstone, and I'm not going to have a transcript, but just trust me on it. I've learned everything that I need to learn, and I got good grades, and I promise, I know that stuff. Is that possible? It is. There are some great self-educated people in the world. They have to do a lot more to prove what their education was, as opposed to being able to turn over a transcript and say, look, I got straight A's and a couple of B's and a C, and you know what they got. LEED is a lot like that for buildings. It kind of gives you that system of what you achieved and what you didn't achieve. And it's a way to speak to the world about what you did and what you didn't do. What would going beyond green mean? So if that's sort of a whirlwind tour of what green is, what would beyond green be? Any ideas on that one? Right, so having, instead of having a less bad impact, to actually reach some true level of sustainability, or to go beyond and to do benefit, to be restorative. Net zero, so that would be, so net zero means, okay, so you're putting in as much as you're taking out. So net zero, not just on an energy basis, because a lot of times when people talk about net zero building, they're talking about just net zero energy, which means you produce as much energy on site for the building as the building consumes. So that's one definition, but you're saying it goes further than that. Or it can go further to where there's a net neutral impact overall. So maybe that's so the idea is that green becomes something that is no longer a necessary identifier, but it just becomes the way that we do things. But in order to get to what the first 2 gentlemen suggested as some measure of sustainability, we probably have a long way to go. So as an ultimate, that sounds to me a little bit like an ultimate goal of if we could maybe just start living in a way that didn't need to define between sustainable and unsustainable, that to me sounds a little bit like a societal goal. Well, we aren't the only people that have asked this question. There are a lot of folks who have asked this question. So the first one that I'm going to talk about is the Living Building Challenge. The Living Building Challenge is sort of from the Cascadia Region Green Building Council. So it's sort of associated with the U.S. Green Building Council, but it's a chapter of the Cascadia region. So that's Washington, Oregon, thank you, and British Columbia. And so it's actually an international chapter there. And they came out with the Living Building Challenge. And I'm a Living Building Challenge ambassador, so I can give like a full 1-hour presentation on the Living Building Challenge. Again, we're going to do a flyby. I promised you that we were just going to zoom through 100 things this morning, and I hope I'm living up to that. But so Living Building Challenge is looking at what a true measure of sustainability be for buildings. So it really uses the metaphor of a flower. So saying, what does a flower do? And a flower harvests all of its own energy and water. It doesn't import energy from any utility system. It's adapted to the climate and to the site, so it's regionally appropriate. A flower in Tucson is different than a flower in Michigan as far as what its energy and water use might be, what its daylight requirements are, what its nutrients are. All of those things vary depending on the site. It operates pollution-free, so flowers do not pollute our environment. Typically, now if you have allergies, you might contest that a little bit. They do put out a lot of oxygen, and for us human beings, that's a good thing, right? It's comprised of integrated systems. So there's sort of this integral system of the flower and the soil and the air and the bees, and they all sort of work together. And finally, it's beautiful. And so could we aspire to have buildings that are more like flowers? That's the guiding metaphor of the Living Building Challenge. So the idea behind the challenge is just that. The challenge is actually not meant to be a one-size-fits-all solution for buildings. It's meant to be a challenge. So when you think of a design challenge, it's something that is meant to lead creativity and create inspiring examples. But one of the things that I've really come to understand about the Living Building Challenge is that it is not meant to be a one-size-fits-all solution to green building. Compared to LEED, which is trying to be sort of everything to everyone, the Living Building Challenge is really setting out to try to set a true standard of sustainability in the built environment. So it set very high goals. It's about embracing the psychology of the end game. So saying, if we were to do as much as we could possibly do, what would it be? And then let's start trying to work towards that goal. So it's a much more aggressive, much more progressive system than LEED, where LEED is more incremental. It's saying, given this current state of building practice, what are some achievable things that we can do around being more green or doing less harm? So there's just a different psychology between the two systems. I think both are valid, both add benefit. In some cases, we need something that's very accessible and very easy to do. And in other cases, we need projects and ideals that will challenge us to do something that's above and beyond. So that's sort of my version of what the challenge is about. The point here that I want to make is actually really on point 2, which is that it is based on actual performance. So in order to prove your energy performance in LEED, you typically use a computerized model to say what your energy would have been, and then you look at what you think your energy will be based on inputs into a computer system. And there's value in that, especially in making decisions, but some of the criticism of LEED is that it's not based on actual performance. The Living Building Challenge is based on actual performance. So you may use an energy model to help you get to your performance goals, but at the end of the day, you're still using your actual performance. So the proof is really in the pudding, as they say. So that's one of the important differences about the Living Building Challenge. Some of the categories are very similar to LEED, so there is a site category. Some examples of what is included in the site category is that you cannot build anywhere that hasn't already been previously developed. It's the idea that humans have commandeered enough land and that we should build within the existing areas that we have already impacted significantly rather than continuing to spread further and further out to undeveloped areas. There's a habitat exchange, so for every acre that your project develops, you have to set aside an equal amount of space in perpetuity for other species. So you have to sort of say that we're going to own this space and we're going to give that space to other species forever and anon. So there are those kinds of imperatives, is what they call them in the Living Building Challenge. And with this, you should also recognize that the imperatives are must-dos. So where LEED has a few must-dos and a lot of options, this is all must-dos. You can achieve a certain number of petals, so you can basically, each one of these categories is, they use the metaphor of the flower, and it's a petal. And you can get sort of petal recognition. So maybe you don't get all of the categories, but you have to get some of them. So there's a little bit of flexibility there. But it's kind of an all or nothing system. It's really about, here's the imperative, and you have to meet this, and you have to prove that you met it, and that's the end of the sort of where the fuzzy line is. The notion of being able to have car-free living, it doesn't mean that you can't have cars. It just means that you have to have the ability to live without a car within the proximity of your project. And urban agriculture, that there has to be a food growing component for most projects until you get over about 3 stories, and then there's a 0 food growing component to it. So you have to grow food in your project to be a living building. For water, it's only 2 imperatives here, but one is that you're net zero water, which means that your project does not use any more water than you are able to harvest on site. Now, before y'all jump out of your seats and tell me about Colorado water law, I know. I realize that is not a completely feasible option here at this time. They do have some alternatives for things where the market is just not ready to accept a particular strategy, but you would still need to prove that you're net zero water. So you're immediately moving to, composting toilets, waterless urinals. You can't use, essentially to do that, you'd never be able to use water for toilet flushing. And you'd have to have on-site treatment systems to be able to treat and reuse your water on-site. And then ecological water flow, saying that you're not disrupting the natural water flows of a place, so that you're not discharging more water post-development than you were pre-development. And in Colorado, given the first one, you say, well, that would never happen. But remember that this is an international challenge, and that it applies in Costa Rica as well as in Colorado or Phoenix. And so in those instances, you could disrupt the natural water flows. The energy category is very simple. Net zero energy is the requirement. So as I said before, that's producing as much as much energy on site as you do off site. Health, and so this is about maximizing the physical and psychological well-being, healthy air, a civilized environment, which to them is really defined by daylight, that people should not work in dark cubes and holes and basements, unless of course you're developing film, which hardly anyone does anymore. But basically everyone should have a window in their office. How many of you work without a window in your office? A few of you. That's a rough space to be. I don't envy that. And then this notion of biophilia, which is sort of humans' innate love of natural things, of wood, of textures, of light, of color, of movement, of water, of elements, and incorporating those concepts into your project. Materials is a really tough category. I'm not going to go through each one of these, but they have a very extensive list of toxic materials that are not allowed to be in your building. I've heard that that's one of the most challenging imperatives to reach, is the imperative around the red list of materials, saying that you shall not have these following 20 items in the materials in your building. And that's pretty challenging. Also, appropriate sourcing is sort of about local materials, and it really brings to light how few materials are actually manufactured close to home anymore. And so I've heard actually that project teams will say, 0 water, no problem. 0 energy, we got it covered. This materials pedal is really flipping hard. So if they're saying that about water and energy, you can imagine sort of the challenges here. But they really try to work with the teams to, you need to demonstrate that you've pushed it absolutely as far as you can, and then there's some caveats you can get out of it if you need to. Equity, so this is a category that we haven't seen in LEED whatsoever, and this is really getting at that human side, of that cultural human side, and trying to define what that would mean. it's about building things to human scale. So many of our developments are built around cars. This is about building things that are more appropriate for the human size being as opposed to the car being. Looking at issues of democracy and social justice and rights to nature, so that we shouldn't be isolating people from the waterway, for example. So in some instances, like private beaches are a perfect example. The notion that private beaches are not acceptable, that you shouldn't isolate the privileged and the non-privileged from having access to nature's wonders. So there are some issues like that are addressed in the equity section. And beauty. So this might be one of like, well, how do you measure beauty? And they've left this one in there as saying, you know, maybe we don't have to measure everything. That it's okay, but that our buildings and our places that we're around should be beautiful. They should be worth caring for. Because if we create ugly places, then people won't care for them. And that turns to a form of social decay. So that we need to build places that are beautiful and inspiring, and they need to have elements that are there for human delight. So that's the idea behind beauty, and also inspiration and education. So if you're going to go through all this effort to meet all of these imperatives, you need to be willing to share that at least sometimes with other people. And this, by the way, can apply to a home or a office building or a landscape, you know, or a development. And so you need to, even if you build a home using all of the principles of the Living Building Challenge, you have to at least once a year open your home for people to come in and learn about what you've done. There are about 70 projects worldwide that are currently seeking the Living Building Challenge, and the first 3 projects just recently got certified. So remember how I said it has to be performance-based? Well, you have to, you know, design the thing, build it, and operate it for a year before you can get certified. And this just came out about 4 years ago. So we're just starting to see the first buildings come online. And there was the Omega Center and the Tison Living Learning Center were the 2 projects that achieved full certification. And then there was a home that received petal recognition for several petals. I know that the home was in the Northwest. I think that the Tison Center was in the East, but they're all available online. So if you're interested, you can certainly look those up and see what they came up with. So more information about the Living Building Challenge can be found at ilbi.org, the International Living Building Institute.org, kind of hard to read down there, but you can learn more about the Living Building Challenge and the projects, and there's, if you want, there's a forum you can join for $100 a year. You can get access to sort of the ongoing dialogues where people found materials, what calculators they use to come up with their net zero water, all of that kind of stuff is available on the forum. So then the last thing that I promised we would go through would be the work that we're doing at CSU. And this is one of my favorite slides these days. I apologize, a couple of you I know have seen this already, but I still can't get over it. So why would I say that a tree is not sustainable? And actually, I didn't say it, but why do I have this slide up here? What does this mean? Or what's wrong with this picture? It's all by itself. So it doesn't have any system around it, right? It doesn't have any soil, it doesn't have any roots, it doesn't have any birds, it doesn't have any, you know, anything, bugs. So by looking at just a building project and not the larger whole, you're inherently promoting non-sustainability. That's the idea that you cannot build a sustainable building. That a building is a part of a much larger system, and that sustainability is part of a much larger system of complex interactions. That buildings cannot exist without the communities that surround them and without the support systems. And so all of this focus on building a building that is sustainable contributes to a larger system of sustainability. But let's just not fool ourselves that a single building can actually be sustainable. So at CSU, we've been working on this project called Lenses. It does have a nice long acronym, like all good rating systems should. And so it's living environments in natural, social, and economic systems. So we have the integrated bottom line here, or sometimes called the triple bottom line, and then recognizing that those are systems, not isolated from one another or can be isolated into specific points. It's really focused on a whole systems approach that looks at the relationships of a place to everything else and looking at how you build those relationships and that understanding to build something that is deeply appropriate and needed for that place. So that's sort of the basic understanding. It goes back to something that you were sort of mentioning, which is that today we're working on systems that are less bad, but they're still fundamentally degrading our natural capital, and in many cases our social and economic capital over time. They have short-lived wealth, if you will. This notion of sustainable is to keep from failing or to maintain, and to restore or regenerate, which is to give new life. And so it's based on this idea that we need to be doing more work in this restorative realm and less work in this degenerative realm if we ever want to get to be sustainable. So the lenses framework embodies a lot of ideas and a lot of philosophies and a lot of research, to be honest. But the basic idea here is to shift paradigms and mindsets towards regenerative action, to moving into that upper circle of restoring and repairing our social, economic, and natural systems. We're creating a series of guidebooks. We hope to have them out sometime just after the first of the year, but it will be for people who work on projects and who want to facilitate a more regenerative practice, who want to move their projects into doing more good than harm. And so that's sort of the basic idea, and we'll have a number of things that would be available to support people through that process of trying to do more good. We believe it's scalable, and it could work for anything from new and existing homes up to master plan communities. The idea is fairly simple. We look through these lenses to build collaborations. I know that's sort of a funny looking building, but someone else built this graphic for me. But this is a building, in case any of you were wondering. But we come together to build buildings, and ultimately for the benefit of the whole system there. So the planet isn't just natural systems. All of us human beings are on there too, and our economic systems are within that. So there's 3 lenses, and I don't think I have time to go through them right now. But basically looking at different components. And then the basic idea behind lenses is that we are going to engage people as human beings, or that it helps to engage people as human beings, to let down a little bit of the professional front that we often bring into our projects and get people to connect on a little bit deeper level, because that builds capacity. People like Peter Senge have shown that the best work that people do comes when they come out of their assumptions and patterns and take a little bit of a deep dive down into themselves as human beings, and that the greatest innovations for Fortune 500 companies come out of this process of suspending belief, taking a deep dive, and re-emerging with a different perspective. And so this isn't maybe as far out as it sounds. It's been very well researched, and we're trying to take those ideas and figure out how we could apply that to actual building projects. And the idea at the end of the day is that we want to create deeply appropriate solutions, that we want to create solutions that are restoring and repairing our natural systems, our social fabric, and creating long-term value and wealth. In my best guess, conventional is here. Today's green is an incremental improvement. Sustainability is something we haven't really reached yet, and we really kind of need to go beyond that to a restorative or regenerative model in order to get to even a sustainable place as a society. Here's our website, here's my email, my phone number. Happy to talk to any of you further. Come and talk about LEED or Living Building Challenge at any of your organizations, or work on your projects, or you can come to our certificate programs, all that good stuff. Do I have a moment for questions? Or okay, so a couple questions perhaps. So it goes back to what the Living Building Challenge talks about as human scale. And there is a notion that there's sort of a sweet spot there where a lot of the old European towns were maybe, somewhere between 3 and 8 stories seemed like a good density level. I think that in general, with density, we are talking about not the ever-expanding kind of suburbia and sprawling parking lots. And I think that if you get, 3 stories is good. We can't all live in high-rises, and especially here in the West, we don't really necessarily need to, but more density and less sprawl is a good thing. So the Living Building Challenge has actually brought out some interesting dynamics with the parameters that they've set. You really kind of can't do it on a high-rise building because it's too energy intensive. You can't produce enough energy on that building to support the building. Your footprint's too small. So they've kind of recognized some interesting patterns. So I don't know if that answers your question directly, but I think there's something about human scale that doesn't fit as much when you start getting into major high-rise construction. Yeah, so the question is why isn't IBE weighing in on a controversial development that's happening for a large student housing project in the center of Fort Collins that is CSU owned? And there's probably a couple of different answers for that. We have talked to some folks about it, and frankly, was not in touch with the recent council meeting that happened to that effect. But also understanding that we are really limited in our ability to affect, what planning and zoning does is really guided by laws and not by public opinion. So I think that providing people access to education and to well-being is one solution to population control. There's a flip side of that. The US represents 5% of the population in the world, and we consume 25% of the Earth's resources. And so the question is really between the degree of consumption and the degree of population. And those are two things. So when everyone in the world is aspiring to live like Americans do, there's a problem with how sort of the precedent that we're setting and the need to bring that consumption level down dramatically. And then the issue of population can be addressed through, I think, one, that it is happening, that we're starting to see declining populations across, really across the planet. As more and more women become educated in particular, we see fewer and fewer children being born. So I think it's a thing that we need to be very aware of, that we may be exceeding our capacity as a species on this planet. And at the end of the day, if education and those things don't work, then we're subject to nature's laws, which sort of demand population control one way or the other.
All right, so Union Place, many of you may have seen newspaper articles about it, and over the last probably couple years now, we finally reached a point of we're in the ground and we've completed most of the horizontal infrastructure. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our project. Merton is the company, a lot of the sustainable improvements we've done on the site, and then we'll just kind of go over just some renderings that we've kind of put together of the site. So Union Place, it's a walkable urban infill mixed-use development. It's approximately 10 acres. It's on North College at Willix and College, so kind of right behind the McDonald's caddy corner to the new King Soopers development. A large percentage of the housing on site is going to be affordable housing. Throughout kind of the site development process, we wanted to create a project from the beginning that really had a lot of sustainable elements on the infrastructure component. A lot of times sustainability is focused strictly on the building, and a lot of these other programs that Josie covered talk about the site, but a lot of times it's just an individual site that one building goes on. So we really tried to tackle it from as large of a site as we had to work with, which was 10 acres, and hopefully in the future as we develop other projects, we can do this on larger sites and bring into things like stormwater management practice on a larger scale, renewable energy systems on a whole for the whole development, low energy site lighting, local landscaping like xeriscaping, low water use. We are attempting LEED on this project. It's a very comprehensive approach when you're doing the LEED for Neighborhood program because it does involve the vertical construction, so it's a pretty long bell curve for the certification process. So Merton Incorporated, we're a design build firm. We're based out of Boulder, Colorado. We've got project managers in Fort Collins and down in Golden, so we're kind of spread out a little bit across the Front Range. We've got Merton Design Studio, which is kind of what I head up as the design component, and Merton Construction, which is our construction side. Our mission is to build innovative designs that possess quantifiable eco-elegance, homes in which unique design and unsurpassed comfort are paired with the responsible use of resources, materials, and energy. So a lot of that is why we took on Union Place, in order to bring just all of these elements together. What you're looking at here is just some of our more single-family resident projects that we've done in Fort Collins and the Front Range. So in the upper left here is the straw bale home that we built. It's the first straw bale home in the city of Fort Collins. Some of you may have toured it over the years. We've had it open during the Sustainable Living Fair, not this year, but the previous 2 years. This home and the interior of this home, these are both SIP homes, which are structurally insulated panels, so foam panel system, and then this is a little straw bale guest cottage that we built in the historic district of the city of Boulder. So now I'm just going to go over some of what we've covered on that infrastructure in Union Place. So what you're looking at here is going to cover kind of the stormwater management principles, and really kind of the idea is we're trying to infiltrate as much of the stormwater as on site as we could without having it just run off into the stormwater system, and then it goes into a management of detention ponds, and then it has to be processed down the line. If we're able to infiltrate that, and there's different trains of thought on that, but at least we can, the main thought is that you can have higher water quality if you're infiltrating it instead of running it off and carrying all of those pollutants across the surface. So a large percentage of our site is these pavers here, which you'll see. This is a color sample of what's actually installed on site now, and then this upper row here is a section of really how this permeability system works. Because the concrete pavers themselves aren't physically permeable, but all the gaps in between them are where all that water infiltrates through finer into more coarser aggregates. So you can see here we've got a pretty substantial, this is an alley behind a row of triplexes in the development. We've got, I think, about 3 to 4 feet of pretty coarse gravel that is basically a volume of void. I mean, there's a lot of void there that can hold a large volume of water as that percolates through, and then allows that to infiltrate slowly into the soil instead of draining into the surface pond and then running off downstream. This slide here is a FlexiPave product. It's just another alternative to the pavers that we're doing. We're only trying a little bit of this out, but it's kind of a thinner material. It's about 2 inches thick, but it's also poured over gravel bases as well. It's just another means of infiltrating. Throughout the project, we've tried to reduce our hardscapes. We've gone with slightly skinnier or wider sidewalks, kind of depending on the perception of where you're coming from. We did 4.5-foot sidewalks. A lot of older neighborhoods have 4 foot wide. A lot of newer projects are doing 5 foot or wider just to create a lot of flow, but anywhere where we could, we tried to reduce those hardscapes or make them permeable. There is still, however, concrete, asphalt on site for the streets and sidewalks. The majority of the parkways, which is the little strip of grass between the sidewalk and the street, we've created bioswales, and basically what that is, instead of that typical crown that you get there where the water falls onto that grass, sheds onto the street, runs down the curb, we've got a concave trench there. And that's designed for the water to flow from the street through these, or off the street into these bioswales, and water can infiltrate in those as it works its way down to the pond, and hopefully the majority of that water infiltrates along its way. And in addition to that, in periodic locations, there's infiltration trenches or dry wells, which are also individual pits of gravel, just kind of placed into little locations. Doing all of this did allow us to do one thing that isn't really common in development, that's the elimination of stormwater piping. So the only stormwater piping on our site brings water from Willix, which is the public right-of-way, across or through our site to the regional pond located on our property. Within the site, it's all designed to surface flow or infiltrate before it reaches that pond. One thing we've tackled, and I mentioned before here, is the goal of the larger project as a whole, having access to renewable resources and renewable energy. So what we've done on this project is we've provided geothermal loop fields as basically a utility that each building will be able to tie into. So on the economy of scale, we figured out, well, if we drill all these loop fields at one time, we get a drill out there and run it for a month and a half, we can install this for a fraction of the cost that somebody might individually pay for a geothermal loop field. So what you see if you drive by the site are a lot of little pieces of PVC spray painted orange with loop fields sticking up, and we worked with an energy rate or lightly treading to size kind of what we felt these loop fields would be based on the design of the buildings and the size of the buildings we were attempting to put forward. So every building on site has access to a geothermal loop field, and they'll be able to tie that into their heating and cooling system, which would most likely be a forced air system, so they could take advantage of both heating and cooling benefits of a geothermal system. And for those of you who don't know how the geothermal system's loops work, basically what you're doing is you're taking a fluid and running it down vertically. Our fields are anywhere from about 175 to about 250 foot deep. As the water goes down, it slowly heats up as the energy from it had been pulled out in the house. We've got a constant ground temperature in this part of the country of about 55 degrees. So that fluid heats up to that temperature, comes up to the ground source heat pump, and then it extracts that energy out of that and is able to use it for both heating and cooling. So ground source heat pumps have lower operating costs. They create a lot more energy than it costs to use. One other exciting thing that we've done on this project is we're an all-electric site, which kind of goes to the last one with PV systems, is that final kind of component of the electricity. But we capped off the utility at the street. We had our first public utilities meeting, and everybody was in there, including Excel, who manages the gas for City of Fort Collins, and we told them that we weren't going to bring any onto the site. So they decided, okay, well, we don't need to be here anymore. So they left. All we had to do was provide them with an access easement parallel to the site, but there is no gas plumbed on the site. So we eliminated 2 utilities that are usually right up front, part of the cost of development: stormwater, sewer, and gas piping. So some of those costs were able to go into the other components of the development, like pavers for stormwater infiltration, site lighting, and some things that you might not see done in such a large scale on a common development. We're currently working with different groups and figuring out different solutions for financing and how to bring PV as well across the whole site and help the whole community achieve net zero. A few other little things that we've tackled is the site lighting. We've spec'd out low energy consumption, high quality lights, so full cutoff, dark sky compliant light fixtures throughout the site. The only exception to the lighting that we were able to provide was the public lighting along Willix and the future Mason Street extension. Both of those were spec'd out of the city standard light allowance, which I think still meet dark sky requirements, but aren't necessarily the same quality of light that we're going to be putting throughout the interior of the site. Xeriscaping throughout, a lot of street trees to help reduce that heat island effect and absorb as much of that kind of heat offset that you get in cities. These are just some general perspectives of the site. We've got numerous parks throughout the site that you'll see in the overall perspective when it comes up here in a minute, but we've got kind of pocket parks, 2 pocket parks or 3, kind of some new urbanist style architecture. This is the street running parallel to Willix, which you'll see over here. So here's a couple construction shots of probably a couple months ago of just the progress. You see all the little vertical pipes, which are some of the loop fields, streets going in. These excavations are, we did pavers in most of our parallel parking, our diagonal parking areas. So you can see the drop from the street down to the parking area where we had those beds of gravel going in. So it's kind of an overview of the site. So right along here, what you're looking at, this is Willix. College is not this road, but it's parallel over here. This is part of the future Mason Street extension for North College, which will eventually, I think, be part of a transit and new commercial corridor that the city's developing. We've got a stretch of mixed use across the first kind of 3/4 of the site, where we'll have ground floor commercial, second floor residential, and then the majority of the rest of the site is all multifamily. We've got a small selection of single family houses around a nice public park for everybody, another pocket park here and here. And then back over here is the regional detention pond that the city had master planned as part of our site, and the pond that we're hoping to have little to none of our stormwater from our site infiltrate into. So that's Union Place. And are there any questions? Doug's question was regarding how the current stormwater, or I guess water harvesting laws, affect stormwater management. as long as the water is moving across the site and you're not doing anything to store that water, you're not impacting the harvesting component of it. So infiltrating, all that stuff is moving the water along into the downstream component. So if we were to take all that water and store it into tanks of water, which we looked at some point because we did have a little bit of water rights as a means for irrigating with that stormwater, that would have been a different situation. But as long as it's going downstream, it's not being contained. I mean, even in these regional detention ponds, as far as I understand, it's not really supposed to stay full for any more than a few days. So the question is, do we need to irrigate the bioswales? I do believe that our irrigation plan has called for irrigation. A large percent of the irrigation's installation is for establishment. We're using, I believe, EnviroTurf, which is a lower water consumption grass. So once they're established, hopefully the cycles can run a lot less frequently. But yeah, they will be, just to kind of make sure that in those dry spells that the overall community as a whole can at least maintain a nice aesthetic. When we originally planned it, no, there wasn't a community garden. This public space over here, which happens to be above the Greeley water line, we had just kind of as a hard surface. We are looking at the option of creating a series of community gardens in that location. We'd really like to. I still have not touched base with the Greeley water line folks to see if they're going to be okay with that. It all should be shallow root stuff, so I'm not expecting much. How some of the design is evolving is some of the garages are kind of going away and leading themselves into more of a open kind of yard space. So a lot of even the multifamily units will potentially have access to some smaller yard space on their own site. So yeah, I'm hoping at least small gardens in each individual unit will become a possibility as well. Sure. The question was regarding why not use pavers throughout. That comes down to cost and decisions. Also, weighing the amount of stormwater infiltration versus the cost. So we don't need stormwater or pavers throughout all of the hardscape to be able to infiltrate all the water that'll be running off of our roofs. So that's one component. You don't need that much infiltration to meet what you're offsetting by the amount of hardscape that you're putting on. And the other is cost. Pavers are a much larger initial cost and long-term maintenance cost sometimes. So that was kind of what drove that factor for us. So absolutely. So the question is regarding the rendering and the pitches or roofs provided, what actual access or potential future access is there for PV and offsetting that component of it. And again, this is a conceptual rendering, so a lot of what I brought in as infill here were renderings of projects to kind of fill the site and create a conceptual mass with some character and scale and potential materials. The majority of the multifamily projects that we're looking at here, and these are triplexes along the back. A lot of that will be evolving more to a flat roof, probably type detail, to allow for an easier access for PV. North-south is this direction, so these clearly are not ideal for that. That said, we are moving that direction to make sure that as that becomes more of a reality on the project, that we are able to provide enough energy for the use of each unit to hopefully offset that full amount.
Well, good morning. We're going to be talking about a couple projects here in Fort Collins, and these are both projects that aren't yet completed. One's almost finished and one's just getting out of the ground. So our first one we're going to talk about is the Rocky Mountain Innovation Initiative on East Vine. A lot of great thought went into this, and I'll just say, from my experience, well-designed buildings take an integrated design process where everybody's working together early in the process, and this was the case in this project. We'll talk about some of the outcomes of that process. One of them is it's got a very good building envelope. It's got a continuous air barrier, continuous thermal barrier system that are integrated. I'll be showing some pictures of that. The other thing is daylighting. There was a lot of work done in schematic design to have a shape and orientation that was conducive to good daylighting. So it's got a very long east-west access that minimizes the exposure on the east and west. You can shade the south and the north you don't have to worry about for glare and things like that. The building is 60 feet wide, which is optimal for daylighting. Kind of a rule of thumb is about 30 feet into the building for side lighting. So you can side light from both the north and the south and get penetration all the way into the building. There are interior light shelves. There's daylighting glazing up high near the ceiling and then view glazing lower. And so there's light shelves below that upper glazing that light up the ceiling and give it a nice bright feel in there. And then daylighting controls to help manage the electric lighting, which by the way is very efficient itself at about less than 0.8 watts per square foot, which is very good. I mentioned the exterior envelope system. It's a Thermax system. This is the shot when they just had all the exterior insulation on. It's 2 inches of foil-faced foam that goes right on the metal studs. All the joints are taped and sealed. And then on the inside of the building, they spray 2 inches of polyurethane foam between the studs. So very good system. It's probably a true R15, 16, something like that. It's also got a great mechanical system. Uses a indirect, direct evaporative cooling. So it's basically 2-stage evaporative cooling and with some mechanical backup just in case. In this climate, it's a great system and it keeps that mechanical cooling off of the utility peak. Has a variable air volume distribution, so that manages fan energy quite well. And this is a business incubator. There's some lab space in there with fume hoods, variable speed drives on those. And since there's a lot of outside air delivery to those spaces, they're using heat recovery for those lab spaces. The building commissioning process, commissioning for those of you that don't know, is the process of ensuring that buildings operate per design intent. Usually revolves around HVAC controls and systems. They have an energy display in the entry, so the building occupants will have a direct connection to the energy use in the building every time they walk in. If they choose to, look up at the screen and have a pulse on how much energy that building is using and hopefully lead to more energy savings just through interaction with the building. Has a pretty good PV system going in, 50 kilowatts. That's over 15% of the annual electricity use that will be provided by this PV. And it's going to go in 3 places. Over here on the right is a carport, so there'll be some abound PV systems there. Then there's an entry awning. There'll be some more photovoltaics there, and then more up on the roof. So I'm kind of an energy geek. That's where I focus. But there's lots of other things, green features in this building, water efficient landscaping. There's some very nice open space around the building. In the back is a canal with lots of cottonwood trees and it's somewhat of a wildlife corridor. They've preserved that. It's a very nice space to go to if you're working there, to go out and have lunch. Bicycle friendly, bicycle storage, showers, changing rooms, preferred parking for low emitting and fuel efficient vehicles. They're purchasing green power. Construction waste recycling, of course, on the building. I'm not sure what percentage they're at now, but that is a lead credit that they're getting, and using certified wood. So the results, and if my calculations are correct, it's right around 60 kBTU per square foot per year, which is very good for a building with labs and things like that in there. 85 kilowatts peak electricity reduction. So that's those summer peaks, because of that indirect direct evaporative cooling. That's power that we don't have to provide to that building. It's 47% lower than just a generic building built to code. So that's pretty remarkable. 35% water use reduction. And it's looking like this will probably be, it's not certified yet, but it's on course for being LEED Platinum. but definitely LEED Gold is in the bag. And the next building I want to talk about is the Fort Collins Museum and Discovery Science Center, which is being built near College in Cherry. This is just an artist's rendering of the entry of the building. This is a 2-story element here, housing the digital dome, and on top is an observation area. Most of the building is a 1-story building. It's about 42,000 square feet. Both these buildings that I'm talking about are very good energy performers, and it's interesting because they've taken different approaches, but they're both very effective. The envelope in this building will be precast concrete, and then there'll be polyurethane spray foam on the interior of that, and then it'll be finished out on the inside. For the HVAC system, they have a very innovative dual duct variable air volume system, and if you imagined a box that varies flow to a space to provide conditioning to it, and it has 2 ducts coming into it. One is conditioned air and one is outside air, and that outside air goes back to a dedicated air handler on the roof that has a heat exchanger, and so any exhaust air that's leaving the building is giving up its heat to that heat exchanger, or cool in the summertime, and exchanging that with the outside air. So when a space is unoccupied, the outside air can be completely shut down, or in shoulder season, when maybe that outside air is cool enough to condition the space, and the conditioned air duct can be completely shut down. Very innovative and efficient system. Providing the cooling is an air-cooled chiller with ice storage. So at night, when electricity is inexpensive and peaks are low, make ice, and then during the day, that ice can be melted to provide cooling for the building and completely keep that chiller off of the utility peak. Radiant in-heat floor in the exhibit area, and for the areas of the building where there is not radiant floor heat, there will be low air returns. So typically, a lot of times in large commercial buildings, the air is delivered from the ceiling, and the returns are in the ceiling, and there's a lot of short circuiting, and people down here are cold. So this is allowing the air to circulate through the space and create better comfort. And then the heat is being provided by high efficiency condensing boilers. Here's a little artist's rendering of one of the exhibit areas. It's not just an energy efficient building, but it's also teaching about energy efficiency. And this is the energy area. You can see 3 different windmills there. There'll be cranks that people can turn and generate electricity, and lots of exhibits, lots of hands-on interactive exhibits to learn about how energy works. And in that space is a very low ambient lighting, energy efficient lighting, and then the exhibits will be highlighted with LED exhibit lighting. The building will have roughly a 20 kilowatt photovoltaic system with an interpretation. If you remember that first picture with the observation area on the top of that entry feature, it looks out on the 1-story roof where the photovoltaics will be, and there will be an interpretation on that area to help people understand how photovoltaics work and understand the whole system. This is using enhanced commissioning, which is the commissioning process that begins early in the design phase, goes through the project into documentation and training of the building occupants, using measurement and verification, which is a process post-occupancy to make sure that the building performs like it's supposed to. Great site. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the site, but just for reference, College runs over here. This is Cherry Street. The Poudre River is running right down here, and then this is Martinez Park down here. This is a brownfield site. It's an old construction waste dump for the city. So lots of great site features like RMI2, water efficient landscaping. Part of the parking is going to be recycled asphalt, so it's permeable surface. A lot of heat island reduction kinds of measures, light surfaces, light roofing. vegetation. Construction waste recycling, again, use of local and recycled materials. In LEED, you get points for being connected to public transit. And since the North Transit Center is right across the street, this is like the ideal site for that. So I have low emitting materials on there, which is a really important thing for indoor environmental quality. So results of this building, this is really impressive. And right now the modeling is showing this at 20 kBTU per square foot per year, which is remarkable for a museum. Typical, when we were doing the research, we set an energy target for the RFP of 40 kBTU per square foot per year, and we were seeing a lot of museums out there at 80 or 100. So if that's what it turns out to be in reality, that's going to be really impressive. 85 kW peak electricity reduction, that's what that ice storage is providing, along with all the other efficient electric lighting and all the other features. 40% water use reduction, and this is teetering right on the edge between LEED Platinum and LEED Gold, likely to be a LEED Platinum project. These two buildings, from my perspective, working with the Integrated Design Assistance Program, they're some of the best buildings we've built. We're doing better. You know, we're on a continuum, and we've got a ways to go. So there, you know, as time goes, on the Discovery Museum has a huge roof area. There's a lot of opportunity as grants come in to get more PV and things like that. And similarly, I believe on RMI2. But the key thing is that they have great building envelopes. They have efficient lighting. They have RMI2 has daylighting. So they have all the elements that are going to move us in that direction. And then the more renewable energy we can provide, we've minimized the energy use in the first place. So we're on the right track.
And what I'm going to talk now is about trying to take some of the principles we've been talking about them and making them mainstream, making them part of every project that happens in Fort Collins through, I'll be frank, a building code update, greening our codes that we have right now. Codes, you know, is one of the roles we have in the city as a regulatory process, and so we'll be talking quite a bit more about that. But they're also like a vortex that we can get sucked into because by their very nature, they are codes. They are required on every project. Now, the Green Building Program that I'm going to talk about is more than codes, but codes is the most immediate thing on our agenda, on our plate. Beautiful picture of Fort Collins. People love it here. It's a very special place. Many of the people want to keep it that way and make it more special as time goes on. And essentially the notion is that green building, improving our built environment, is a very important or even essential component of maintaining that sense of place and why people love Fort Collins. Why do we care about green building? Why do we care about the built environment? Oftentimes I wish we didn't call it green building. Green has some baggage that comes along with it every time you talk about it. There's a tremendous amount of evidence that green buildings are simply better buildings. They are better for, you fill in the blank. They're better for learning, they're better for production, they're working environments, they're better for selling things, they're better for living in. Why is that? Because they are a healthier environment inside, a better indoor environmental quality, luminous environment, the acoustical environment, the thermal environment, all of those things that make us want to be in a place or not be in a place. You've all experienced buildings where you just want to leave because it's a bad environment for any of those various reasons. And you've been in ones that are good. Green buildings in general are often better. There are even some quantifiable studies around that. Poudre School District participated in one where they learned that kids' test scores are higher when they have daylighting and views to the outdoors. Go figure, but it's quantifiable. Walmart studies on people buy more when they have daylighting in their stores. Daylighting is a standard feature on Walmart stores. They spend longer in the store, you're going to buy something extra in there. So we have, there are some quantification on these benefits. We know they cost less to operate and maintain, And there's starting to be some evidence that they have higher future value in the long run. They are better buildings over time. Continuing this on why we want to do this is that buildings done poorly is a lost opportunity. Every building we build is important. The design and construction decisions impact that building throughout its lifetime, which is longer than many of us are around to be looking at it, operating it, paying for it. So the buildings we're building now are going to be in place through and beyond the 2050 planning horizon that a lot of our policies address. So we need to try to maximize the benefits of those buildings, each and every one. Lastly is leadership. Fort Collins is a hub for energy efficiency, for clean energy. We want to continue that and try to improve upon that with all of our building projects. At the same time, the city, capital C, City of Fort Collins, doesn't build buildings, doesn't design them, and we do in a limited sense, we have our own buildings, but it's owners, builders, contractors, architects, engineers, vendors and suppliers, and all those people that actually build projects. But they have to interact with the city in a whole variety of different ways. Different zoning regulations, the land use code, the building code, development review and permitting and inspection processes that they interact with that defines some of the how and what happens with our buildings. So there's different pieces of our green building program that are going to need to address how that interaction happens. So the charge we had from council late last year was to develop a Fort Collins specific green building program that included both required code elements as well as voluntary above code elements to bring back to them for their consideration and feedback and planning on. That's what we've been working on, and that's what the process I'm going to be trying to describe today and give you a snapshot of where we're at today and what's coming up. So as initially we set out, well, what are we need some guiding principles behind how we're going to do this, what's important. First, we wanted to recognize that there is green building already going on in Fort Collins. We're not inventing something new. We're not looking at something that's, again, hypothetical and out in the future, but there's a lot of green building projects, residential and commercial, that are being built without us telling them what to do at all. We want quality projects that are substantive, they're measurable, so we're not talking about fluff, and we want to keep our city processes relatively navigable. Again, there's always a tension when you're in a regulatory environment of how you do things. We also recognize that there are these different layers of regulatory pieces that overlap each other. So we've got building scale, then you have neighborhood and urban scale. So in our green building program, we're largely talking about the building and the immediate site around it. And sometimes even the immediate site can't be addressed through required kind of elements. It can through broader elements. But then there's also the larger urban scale, and that's been going on through the Plan Fort Collins process, which has been parallel to this. Many of you may have seen some of the open houses and requests for information around the Plan Fort Collins process as well. But mostly we're focused on individual buildings. Won't go through in detail on the timeline. From late last year, we've had council work sessions in January and another in July, where we're getting direction from them, providing our feedback. I'll point out there was also a building code update that went in parallel. I will touch on that later as well, that impacts what we're comparing to. So if we're going to do something new, compared to what is the question. Our initial model looked at, okay, what are the things we want to have in a green building program overall? There's some foundational elements around costs and benefits, around metrics and tracking, and around looking at already the codes and standards we already have in place, where there are barriers and conflicts within our existing system, how those can be addressed. There's a regulatory component, looking at making required green building code of projects that are done. And then a market-driven above code that's around incentives, education and training and recognition. This is what we started with as we developed our program model. With the timeline of the project and council's expectations, that narrowed, I'll be honest with you, to looking at the code element first. And the code element's going to end up informing some of the others. And for most of the rest of today, we're going to be talking a lot about code stuff. These other elements, the above code piece and the foundational ones, are still in our work plan. They're still what we are going to be continuing to work on probably over the next year at least, and perhaps longer, because it's an ongoing process. How did we assemble a group of people to work on this? It's a very high profile, lots of stakeholders and interested parties in this. So we have a core staff that works on this. A few people can raise their hand. So Doug Swartz, Gary Schrader, Felix Lee, Amanda Sutton, and myself are kind of the core of the green building team. We're also working very closely with Russ Hovland, Mike Gibo, and Steve Dush in the planning and building departments. We're managing the project as well as bringing our own expertise and experience that we have in building. We have a green building program advisory committee. This is really at the stakeholder level. So we have somebody like the Chamber of Commerce, the Board of Realtors. They are stakeholders in this kind of process, and they have met not very frequently, a few times, to try to stay in touch and provide them with information about how the project is going. The real work has been done by two groups called our Technical Review Advisory Committees. We have one for residential, the R-Track, and a parallel on the commercial. This group really is a code focus. We're going to be walking through trying to come up with what we should be bringing to council, what recommendations should we be making. And we're bringing these people in for their expertise, for their technical and market knowledge of how buildings get built, how the whole market works. We have a consultant involved that's doing some of the side analysis and cost and benefits work, kind of an extension of our staff working group. We have a facilitator to help keep the process rolling. The track meetings have been held essentially every 2 weeks since about May, I believe, late May, that they've been getting together every other week, whether if on the commercial or residential side, which means every week if you're one of the staff people that's involved. So that's kind of our picture of how we've tried to do this process. So codes in general. Building codes started out firmly in the health and safety. We wanted to make sure buildings don't fall down, buildings don't burn down because of electrical problems, they don't flood because of plumbing problems. That's the basis for our building codes. On top of that, starting 30 years ago or more maybe, energy efficiency codes became a part of it. It was essentially a community and a national value placed around we ought to have minimum standards for energy use and the efficiency within buildings. That's where the energy codes came into play. The green codes are on top of that, and they both broaden the breadth of the types of things that are covered under codes. And look at materials for an example. So a health and safety code might look at a particular piping material, say this is safe to use, or a proper material in there, but some of the other finishes and other things you put in houses, they're not covered under codes. As well, so breadth and then depth. So we may want to go and ask for more efficiency if it's a green building rather than what's just under the codes as they stand now. So I mentioned the code process that went on and overlapped ours. So starting late mid-2009 through the middle part of this year, Mike Gibo in our building department led an advisory committee to work on the adoption of an updated set of building codes for the community. So for the first time, these were adopted by council action in September. I believe they went into effect last week or the week before, somewhere along time. So these are the newest codes that apply to new construction and building permitted projects. So it's a set of all from the same year from the International Code Council. So they reference each other. It's a comprehensive set of codes, general building code, residential, mechanical, fuel gas, and energy conservation code. As this happened, this became our baseline as we look at anything different. So if we're going to go above and beyond and green our existing codes, our reference point changed as of a couple weeks ago. So we were kind of anticipating this and looking this along the way, but at the same time, I'll be honest, it presented a challenge because council was still talking about some of the elements, and so we're kind of the compared to what was not a simple. But what we've been asked to look at scope-wise is greening our codes through for residential and commercial construction. So it's basically everything that gets built, new construction, and then to look at how it would impact, how it fits in with alterations and additions to existing buildings. So both what is the code and then where does it apply in different types of scenarios. I won't belabor this point because you heard it from a number of other speakers, but the scope, when you look at a green building, if you look at LEED or parallels on the residential side, they cover again from site all the way down through education, operation, and maintenance. But then when you look at this list and overlay it with what the building code covers, they don't line up necessarily very well in all the areas. So for example, a lot of the site and some of the lot issues don't happen in the building code, they happen in the land use code. Land use code has a different cycle of review and updates, and so we've used this structure to kind of step through, and but not all of those things are coming up in the next council meetings. Some of those were pulled out and said, well, here's a set of information and recommendations that the next land use code cycle ought to be looked at, but they're not being addressed immediately right now. And just in general, a lot of these, again, are stretching kind of the boundaries of what's typically in building codes. So we started out looking at adopting a green building code. So we went back, you saw the 2009 sets of codes. The intent when we started out was, we're going to adopt a green building code that's going to be another one that lays on top of that. And for residential, we looked at the National Green Building Standard. It is quite a new system. It has the date of 2008. It really came out later in 2009. As far as we know, there's one jurisdiction in the country that has adopted this as a code. And so we wanted to look at this and say, okay, let's use this as our template for reviewing codes. On the commercial side, the International Green Construction Code is a parallel to that. It is even newer in that what's out now is a public review draft. It has not been formally published yet, and yet it still provided a structure for us to walk through all of those elements and say, how does this compare with what we're doing now? Is this something that we want to recommend and start to look at more carefully for inclusion in code? What we largely found is that we thought they were not ready for prime time for different reasons. The National Green Building Standard is a rating tool. It's very much like LEED in that you gather points in different areas. You get so many points, you can become certified at a different level. That's very difficult to apply to codes, which are the minimum standards, minimum community standards for a new building. So you take something that we think you ought to do this, it's a minimum standard, but it's optional and you can gather some points in different areas. As well as we thought that the flexibility and the information requirements, it wasn't clear that you'd be accomplishing necessarily the goals that we were after. In the case of the commercial one, it was actually kind of the opposite. It was very structured and very strict, and it seemed that it was almost too big of a jump for all buildings for that requirement. So we took that message back to council in July and said, we think it's better to look at, quote unquote, greening our building codes by making specific amendments, making specific requirements within the structure of the international codes, rather than adopting an overlay of a whole nother building code. They agreed with us, and so our charge changed to greening these codes. They also said, well, do it by December. That's when it worked. So this is where we're at now in terms of our process, and what I'll be talking about for the next 10, 15 minutes or so is leading up to this December work session and what we want to bring to council for their feedback. So we used the review of these two standards as well as a number of other sources to come up with a set of recommended green building practices that we think make sense as the next sort of sensible next steps to require of all projects in Fort Collins. Now, I'm not going to stand here before you and say this is regenerative work, restorative that Josie's talking about, or even that they're like the Discovery Science Center or the RMI2 project that are sort of advanced LEED projects. These are incremental steps, but we're talking about requiring it of every single project in town. So we are getting collectively, we think, a strong benefit from that, and setting on the path of asking for more from our buildings. So some of the themes that go in, so how do we decide if this one makes sense or not? You have a particular kind of carpet specification that might be in LEED. How do we decide whether that makes sense for a required element in a building code? These are some of the things we looked at. The breadth, how much we want to be leading. How does it look in the I codes? We're using this somewhat to refine the work that was done over the last year in the adoption of those I codes. We really looked a lot at the installed performance and a systems approach. Many of the typical building processes are not integrated. They're very linear in nature. You know, the architect designs how he wants it to look. Electrical engineer comes in and decides how he wants the lighting to be. That gets passed off to the mechanical engineer who figures out how to heat and cool it, and the contractor will figure out how to build it. And so we tried to bring in the elements of integrated design, installed performance, systems approach. Lost opportunities was a big one. There are many things in a building that change regularly over time. Carpet might be one of them that, you know, over the life of a building may get replaced many times. The building envelope itself, how it's constructed, happens once. We don't want to miss that opportunity. And to a certain extent, you know, it's a real world out there. We need to have reasonable steps, things that can be done, can be accomplished by many or most contractors now. And we also hope to keep some alignment between the residential and commercial. So there are some certainly overlapping themes. We know there are inherent challenges in this. Change is difficult. The economy right now sucks. There's not much building going on. You know, there's a lot of sort of potential pushback in trying to bring some new regulations to the building world at the moment. Infrastructure is an issue in some cases. We may want to accomplish something, say on the recycling side. If there's no infrastructure with which to recycle that particular material, we can't jump ahead and require it of every project. Somebody in a voluntary lead approach maybe could do that because they're going to figure out a way to recycle that one material. But if there's no infrastructure, then we can't exactly require it. How much of this is an economic case? We know we're going to get lots of questions from council, and so we're trying to prepare the benefit and cost information in there, but we're making trade-offs between first costs that are paid by one person or one stakeholder versus ongoing benefits that may be reaped by somebody else. And so they're not simple benefit cost pieces in there. And we also have to look at it from a city in terms of implementation resources. Building department is not flush with staff that can go out and look at all kinds of new, different types of requirements in buildings. So that's another balancing piece of the challenges. What I'm going to go through now is just a snapshot of the package of recommended green building practices that we are preparing to bring to council in December. So these would be, I think it's proper to think of them as new minimum requirements for residential, for commercial buildings. But we're asking for feedback from council. So they're not taking any action at this point. We're going to take the information, get their feedback, but they do have a pretty short time schedule. They have dates scheduled in March to actually adopt these code proposals. So we're going to turn around from the feedback from them, hopefully have enough clarity to write those into actual code language and bring those back at the beginning of March. So starting with residential, here is kind of what's on the what's in our plan. Now, not all of these, I'll even say now, there's a few that are still maybes in here. You know, we're still gathering the information and working with our track committees, the residential ones tomorrow, to get more feedback, and we're still working on these things. It's kind of circling in on the answer rather than some answers are completed. On the resource efficiency side, in construction waste management, we'd be requiring a recycling plan, and we would require recycling for 4 materials: wood, metal, concrete, and cardboard, that we think that there's plenty of infrastructure in place to require those. On the energy efficiency side, starting with the building envelope or the shell of the building, we're talking about solar control, basically some limits on the unshaded glazing or window area on certain aspects of the house. We're definitely looking at advanced air sealing and looking at what's in the ICC codes and scaling that back to what we think is a better level and also reflects current practice. And perhaps some things on the window thermal properties and installation. On the mechanical side related to energy efficiency is probably the area we think we're going to have the biggest impact. We're looking at requiring what we call safe combustion appliances. Many of you may have a water heater like this with a little hat on top and a flue going up. That would not be allowed under the new code, purely because these have a very high failure rate of spilling combustion products into the house. There are viable alternatives available, and we get other benefits related to infiltration in the house and some of the other things we try to do just to make these things work. So that's an example of what would change. We've got elements around design requirements for heating and cooling systems. Here's another large one. We're looking at requiring whole house ventilation in residential construction. So no longer relying on the fact that houses leak or have some infiltration where the air comes from somewhere, to actually having, well, you're going to have a system in place that ensures that you can have a well-built, tight house and good indoor air quality from a ventilation perspective. Things like high-efficiency motors in furnaces, installation requirements on ductwork, and Gary mentioned commissioning. We're talking about commissioning of equipment on the residential side. So not only do you have a furnace there, but does the furnace work properly? Is it performing as it was intended? And making that part of, again, the building code process. On the water side, looking at requiring low-flow fixtures, essentially the WaterSense label from EPA, similar to the Energy Star label. Kind of looking at high-efficiency irrigation and reduced turf area. That's an interesting one in that, again, it's not part of the building, so it's not part of the building code. So we think that's an important thing to try to pursue, but we're not sure it fits, which bucket it fits in right now. It's not really the land use code, it's not really the building code. Around some requirements on indoor environmental quality on materials, essentially trying to make sure that the worst things that are out there don't get in our buildings. It's not that we're promoting the best things, but keeping the worst ones limited. A couple of other categories, dark sky, exterior lighting requirements, and an owner operations and maintenance manual. So when you get a house, you ought to get a manual about how your house works, how it should be maintained, how it should be operated. On the commercial side, the resource efficiency is a parallel to the residential. So recycling plan and the 4 required recycling of materials. On energy efficiency, one proposal on how the electrical distribution system is designed that makes monitoring easier. A very important piece on the building envelope. We've actually built pretty good houses now. We've learned a lot about how building envelopes work. Generally, we build really poor quality commercial building envelopes. Imagine a cheese grater, from an air perspective, that's what a lot of our commercial buildings look like. So this would require the continuous air and thermal barrier that Gary mentioned on the RMI2 project, as well as installation standards around insulation. A number of details around mechanical system controls, how things work in hotels and motels. If you've ever been in many other countries, you can kind of turn off the whole room. On-site renewables requirements, daylighting and outdoor lighting controls. Quite a few things on the commercial side related to indoor environmental quality, related to keeping things clean, so access and cleanability of the air handling systems, what kinds of materials you can have in plenums, protecting that system during construction and flushing it out before people move in. Those are all kind of on the mechanical system side, making it sure it can provide a healthy environment. You'll see a lot of these in LEED and the IGCC code requirements. Sound and daylighting are another one. We'll say that about the only downside on a lot of the LEED commercial buildings is they found many of them have poor acoustics. And it's because the move to harder surface materials are easier to clean, they're greener from a lot of other perspectives, but they can have a negative impact on acoustics. On the water efficiency side, again, WaterSense fixtures, eliminating once-through cooling applications is kind of a specialty thing on some commercial applications, and looking at sub-metering on the water side of multifamily. Many cases in the multifamily environment, you don't have any feedback on how much water you use because there's no meters. It's not metered at that level. A very important one is that the basic building commissioning, as defined by LEED and ASHRAE, would be required on commercial buildings. That's not done now on the vast majority of buildings, and most buildings are delivered, don't work properly. We're also looking at a requirement for energy assessments for building alterations as they are upgraded or remodeled or renovated over time, that we want to get in there and be doing energy assessments. So what are we going to be bringing that any of you or council is going to be looking at to review some of this? First is going to be we're calling the code proposal at a glance. It's going to be some kind of simple spreadsheet, hopefully fits on 1 page or 2 pages, that gives a what are we talking about for the practice, a short description of it, and what's the intent? What are we trying to accomplish with that? There's going to be an overall benefit cost summary that's going to address a typical house, a typical commercial building. What do we think the cost and benefit impacts of this package of measures and green building practices is going to look like, from first cost to life cycle and ongoing costs. And then each of these practices that I just touched on with bullets is going to have a summary as well, somewhere between 1 and 4 pages, hopefully towards 1, that will go into some detail on that particular practice. What is it? A more detailed description. What are the costs and benefits? What are the implications for verification of that through our code inspection processes, etc. So that's the package that we're assembling right now to bring to stakeholders and to council come December. So kind of wrapping up, I mean, our challenge is to create better buildings that support the integrated bottom line and the goals the community has, and to figure out where to start to make this a community requirement. Again, we're talking what's the minimum standards that we should require of all buildings, recognizing that spectrum, that I also think of it as a running race. Sometimes we have men and women who win the race. They're in a class all by themselves. They're out there regenerating and restoring energy somehow. You have sort of the elite runners that might be characterized by some of the building projects that Gary talked about. And then you have the mainstream, the ones that are out there jogging or walking along, but there's a lot of us doing that. So again, it has an important impact. Luckily, we have lots of role models here in town. We haven't talked much about Poudre School District today, except in reference to a couple of their buildings, but they're a national leader in how to change the way you deliver buildings, to deliver very high performance buildings that don't cost any more to build, and yet have tremendous benefits both for the students as well as for us as a community in terms of paying for the ongoing operations and maintenance of those. We have parallels, we have residential builders here in town that are building really good buildings that this code may not impact them very much, but we want to sort of bring everybody up to that base level and get started on this path. While we're talking mostly about code, we still have all of these other pieces to work on and do as part of our charge. So we will be, once we get through this initial phase, looking at how do we support those leaders, the ones that are out in front, to do even better with incentives, recognition, what are the education and training requirements needed by building owners, by contractors, by code officials, etc. But I'm not going to lie to you, right now we're talking about regulation and greening our building code. So what are kind of the next specific steps? We still have, the code proposal is not finalized. Most things I put up there are pretty darn close. We think all of those pieces are going to be in there, but we're still working with staff and with our R-Track and C-Track in meetings coming up over the next month or so. We'll be out talking with the city boards and commissions, a scary number of those meetings coming up in November and early December, just because there's so many interested stakeholders. So everything from the Building Review Board to the Natural Resources Advisory Committee, you know, they're all interested in this, so we're going to be out talking with them. There's a public open house that was just scheduled for November 17th. It's probably going to be 4 to 7 p.m. or something along those timeline out at the Streets facility, leading up to our City Council work session on December 14th. We have been trying to keep agendas, minutes, and we will be posting a lot of the code proposals and the at-a-glance summaries on fcw.com/greenbuilding website. I'm ready for questions. Question was, when might the first projects actually fall under these requirements? That's a great question. The schedule that council has is to adopt by ordinance these measures in their first two regular meetings in March. One of the key questions we're going to be asking them in December is the implementation schedule is a separate question. Sometimes you adopt a code that becomes effective at a later date, the middle of the year, the end of the year. That's one of the key things we're going to be asking them and trying to work with our building department on aligning how quickly we can start these requirements. In the case of the ICC codes, they were adopted, I think, the third week in September. 2 weeks later, they went into effect immediately. So, and are current projects required to fall under that? I think the answer is no. Or Felix, can you help me with that one?
The process will take effect, as John said, probably at some later implementation date. I don't know when, but maybe it's sooner than that. I would expect we'd want some time to prepare builders, the building community, and staff with training and many other of those issues.
But a project that is in the process when the new code takes effect, does it fall under the prior regulations or the new ones?
No, you can't.
You can't change the game in the middle.
No.
Okay. The question was about, are we engaging with the appraisal community? Because that's a critical component in terms of financing, typically through mortgages for homes, the increased value that we think comes out of doing a better building like this. We do have the appraisal industry represented within our stakeholder group, the Program Advisory Committee. And there are certainly some activities and discussions at state and other levels on how do we connect the dots here to make sure that we're getting fair comparisons of true value. Is that all put together and integrated right now? No. At the same time, I think the measures we're talking about here are incremental in nature. They are not a large change in the costs of these buildings. So I don't think we're at risk of really not having projects be financeable because of what we're talking about here. But in the longer run, as we look at even more advanced projects, that could be an issue and is one that the industry is going to have to figure out along the way. The comment or question was around the possibility of homeowners beginning to act as their own contractors and as essentially a way to try to not build to the same standards or not use people that are trained and licensed to work at these levels. You know, it's a big tent we're trying to move along here and get it to move a little bit, and we're very cognizant of the needs on the education and training side, both again, not both, but homeowners, contractors, general subcontractors, building officials, to knit this together and make it work. And I think anytime you start on something new of this type, it'll be bumpy sometimes, I'm sure. The question was concerning how we try to characterize some of the costs and benefits that don't translate well sometimes to a simple dollars and cents, especially looking at between first cost and life cycle cost. And are we going to try to do that on a measure by measure basis? And the answer is we're going to focus much more on the summary cost benefit. So it looks at it from a whole project perspective. What does this look like? Rather than dissecting it from a line by line individual measure. At the same time, on our detailed summary sheet, we are going to have some of that line by line information in there, and try to characterize what the qualitative, sometimes triple bottom line benefits are versus those that we can quantify. So I think what we're going to go after is transparency. Here's the best information we have on what the hard first cost is, what we think the ongoing, say, operations and maintenance savings are going to be, and what we intent behind the measures and the benefits we'll receive, and present that information plainly and clearly. So thank you very much for coming today, and we look forward to your feedback.